Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Bar Business Podcast, your ultimate resource for bar owners. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, and today I am joined by another Chris Tunstall of A Bar Above. He has decades of experience behind the bar, and that's in bartending and management. He has a huge passion for mixology, and he has moved from behind the bar and kind of working within the industry to supporting the industry by doing some really great courses on cocktails, putting out a fantastic amount of free information online, really great cocktail primers, and how to do different cocktails. And then he also has great products that he sells as well to really support the bar industry and to make sure that we don't have, well, quite frankly, cocktail shakers that fall apart, among other things. So first of all, Chris, thank you so much for being here. And I know we kind of briefly talked about what you do, but I think it would be really great if everybody could learn a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, and first of all, I appreciate being on your podcast. And we talked a little bit before, and I'm very excited about the topics that we're going to cover today, because I'm very, very passionate about bar and bar education and training and all the things, especially when it comes to management training. So, yeah, so you kind of gave a great overview. So I started tending bar back in 2003 as I was going to school, and I always knew I wanted to own my own company, and I loved cooking. So I always thought, I'm going to open my own restaurant one day. So I got really excited about tending bar and fell in love with it. And back in 2003, there was this word keeps coming out called mixology. And I'm like, well, that's weird. What's that? And so I started looking into it and was incorporating fresh juices and really taking a lot more culinary approach to cocktails versus the sweet and sour mixture stuff that comes out of a gut. So that really caught my interest, and I knew it was going to blow up. So I kind of leaned into it and really started learning all the advanced techniques that I could. And at that time in 2003, and just something I've talked about before, there was two places where this movement was happening. It started in New York, and then it hit San Francisco. And that was pretty much it. That's the only place it was happening in the world, from my understanding at the time. And the number of people that were in that movement, if you count on your hands, and you knew who they were. So it was a very, very tight-knit group. And, I kind of fell in love with learning the culinary side of cocktails. Now, when we talk about mixology, there was kind of a negative stigma about that word. And it was the reason why we had that negative stigma is because the focus was being put on the bartender and not on the guest. So it was kind of an ego trip at the time. And so there was a super negative connotation with that. Not only that, but there was a lot of just kind of like insulated environments where they weren't actively sharing information. And I found that incredibly frustrating. So when I moved to San Francisco, gosh, man, it must have been 2009. I figured I kind of knew what I was doing. I was up in Latin at the time, and I moved to San Francisco, and I'm like, okay, I've been learning a lot. I've been paying attention to this for a long time. I'm ready to make my move in San Francisco. And when I got there, I realized I didn't know anything. I didn't know the proper techniques on how to make a cocktail. I didn't know flavor combinations. I didn't know ratios. I didn't know anything. And so I was quickly educated on it. But during that time, they would tell me I was making recipes wrong, like the old fashioned. And they would kind of berate me. And then I asked, okay, great. Well, how do you make it? And they wouldn't tell me. So I found this incredibly infuriating. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to learn everything I can learn here, and then I'm going to share it with the rest of the world. And that's kind of how we started A Bar Above, was through YouTube channels, communicating these new techniques, these new pieces of equipment, these, everything that we can communicate out to the world in order to help people learn how to make these craft cocktails at a very, very high level. So that's kind of what started it. And then got into consulting, got into making our own tools, got into YouTube cocktail creation online, got into making our own courses, did our own podcast, had our own Facebook group. Like you name it, we have been around the block a long time. We probably dabbled in something, even what was it, Apple Clubhouse for a while, until that failed. So we've done things, sure.
And so one thing that it just occurred to me, and I've never thought about this before, but when you started talking about culinary and then mixology, it made me think about the old school fine dining kitchen kind of chef. I'm a dick. It's my way. It's my recipe. Screw you. And I mean, that kind of died out with the really high end fine dining towards the end of the 1990s, early 2000s. But it's almost that same attitude then that went into mixology that kind of, I mean, in some ways it makes sense based on the industry culture.
Right.
But to your point, it stopped the democratization of it as things were moving forward.
Yeah, and I think there was a good purpose for it at the time too. Like when we think about what was happening in that time, with the people that were innovating, they were spending a decent amount of time
Mm-hmm.
learning how to do this, right? So that was their business competitive advantage. It separated them from everybody else around them. So to keep that information in house and to keep a kind of under lock and key made a ton of sense. But as a bartender trying to actively learn this information was incredibly frustrating. So like I understand the business side of it. We saw the same thing with Tiki, way back when,
Mm-hmm.
that they would keep all the recipes super, super secret. So I think we were going through that time. But it wasn't a great environment to be a guest, and it definitely was not a great environment to be a bartender, unless you were on that inside, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
popular crowd, the cool kids. And I was never a cool kid. So,
Well, you're an app, so it works. Um,
right.
but and the other thing too about that just popped into my head is that if you think about something as simple as a jigger, the 2000, 2005, if you used a jigger behind a bar, you were just weird,
Yeah.
right? Mixology brought jiggers back. And what's interesting is while the kind of attitude around mixology has gone away, in a lot of ways mixologists have won because now most bars use jiggers. Where 20 years ago it was really kind of rare.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it, and it was a weird transition that happened with that too, because I was in the industry having this conversation at that time. I started attending bar in 2003, and I spent 15 years behind the bar at that point, mostly managing cocktail programs, and a lot of it was the same conversations we're having now, but in reverse. It was about guest experience. Like if you pull out a jigger, that's a terrible guest experience because they assume you're going to short them. I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
they're getting what they paid for, right? They're whatever your house pour is, if it's an ounce, ounce and a half, 2 ounces, whatever that is, they're getting exactly what they get, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
shorted, which often happens, and it's not completely overpoured, which is what the customer was hoping for. So I think it just kind of like level set it, and then now we're seeing the opposite of like, oh, use a jigger for as much as you possibly can in most restaurant bars and high end bars and stuff like that. I think neighborhood bars, you know, you're gonna do whatever fits your environment, right? And there's never gonna be any difference on that.
I mean, I will embarrassingly admit that I have served margaritas with Sprite and orange juice in them. Because the
You know?
neighborhood bar scene gets weird sometimes,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
especially back because I bought that. The first bar I bought was in 2011, so that was
uh-huh,
right as all this was changing. So in 2011, neighborhood bar margaritas, Sprite, and orange juice made sense somehow. I don't think
right.
today I would do that, but back then it worked.
Well, unless
Um,
that's what your customers actually want,
right,
like figuring out what your customers want and testing and getting feedback. If that's what they want, that's what they want.
right. As weird as it is, but
Right.
so you had this. You came up in mixology, you learned it, and then you said, okay, I want to democratize this information. I want to get it out to people. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the genesis of your mixology course that you have on a bar above, which has now
Yeah.
been around for what, like a decade, and is consistently named one of the top bartending courses available online.
Yeah, so we launched the Mixology certification in 2014, and it has been going ever since. And to your point, liquor.com makes it the number one bartender training course. I don't even know how many years in a row now. And it is a deep dive into everything. It's not tending bar. It is about constructing cocktails from a culinary approach and a scientific approach. Um, and like I said, it is a very, very deep course. And for anybody that hasn't experienced this, I'll kind of give a quick overview of it. But if you take it at a decent pace, you try to really absorb the information. We recommend about a 9-week course, a timeline to get really saturated with the information. So we identify every single variable there is in the cocktail world that goes into making cocktails. Everything from fruit to alcohol to syrups and sugars to mixers to even the glassware and the ice. Like if it's a variable, it goes in a glass. We identify it and we talk about it. And I'll use one area as kind of a primer and example of kind of how we built the entire course out. So the very first like module is all about acid. And the biggest acids we use in bartending are going to be lemon, lime, pineapple, orange, cranberry. So we kind of talk about the flavor profiles, we talk about the pH levels, and we talk about the sugar levels of all of the common mixer or juices. Then we go down into another level, like a lemon is in a lemon. There's a lot of different varieties of lemon. There's a lot of different varieties of lime. A key lime is very different from a Tahitian lime, which is very different from, finger limes. And so we identify every variable that we can figure out on that level, talk about the sugar, talk about the flavor, and talk about the pH. Then we go one step down and say, okay, that's cool, that's fruit. What about uncommon acids like verjus, which is unripened grape juice, which has a super high, almost a vinegar level of pH to it. And so we talked about all the uncommon acids that you would find in the world. And then, pH, sugar content, all that. Then we talk about refined acids, malic acid, tartaric acid, citric acid. How do you combine all these ingredients in order to achieve balance in your final cocktail, right? So then you can make a New York sour, but you're using red wine as your acidifying agent by adding citric acid and malic acid to have that presence of lime or lemon, but all the depth and all the flavor of red wine. So that is one portion of all the other variables that we go into the same level of detail on. So it's a very intense program. Then we offer homework. So if you want to do additional learning, but we also develop your palate along the way. So for that acid, it is taste water with a squeeze of lemon in it. Great. Taste it with just the oils expressed over the top of it. It's a different flavor profile. Now taste it with both of them combined. So we're really trying to hit all the marks of like physical and also mental for learning all this information and making it practical as well. I think it's a 75 question test at the end. And then you have to take one cocktail and evolve it 3 different times through the techniques that we described. And then somebody on our team actually grades it in person. So it's a very, very, very intense course. But if you want to go from I make drinks to I create drinks, this is the only way that I've seen that really takes you to that step-by-step process.
Well, I think too that sometimes people, they get in this mindset that if you're going to do mixology, you have to go all out, right? And if you think about the detail of what you're talking about, it's maybe, in a neighborhood bar, you're not going to serve some crazy cocktails, right? You probably don't have egg whites behind your bar. You might nowadays, but a lot of neighborhood bars still don't. But the thing is that when you get to that level of detail, when you're talking about specific ways acid work and different flavor profiles, that's applicable to everybody. So, having the knowledge is fundamental, even at a lower level, if you will, because it allows you to play more and it gives you more ideas.
And that's what it's all about. We provide a structure and then we identify the variables and let you plug and play. So you take a standard recipe and you can tweak 2 or 3 things and it's a completely different cocktail. You don't have to go crazy like, a lot of these high-end places, but you can do really cool spins on your house cocktails that separate you from everybody else around the area. And the thing I love about this the most, and what really got me excited about like really learning this, identifying it, and implementing it into the bars and restaurants that I managed was back then the profitability was high. It was huge. This is how I'm going to make my numbers. Is I'm going to make all these craft syrups. I'm going to do all this stuff in house, and it's going to 100% move the needle from my cost of goods. Like I never missed a bonus.
So you said back then it does. Does it? What about now? Is it?
It's going to be a little bit different because Yeah, it's going to be different because now it's kind of more level playing field. So
Mm,
it's not as much of a competitive advantage, but there are definitely ways of implementing this and that you can go up market on your menu pricing, depending on your bar and restaurant. If you have a fantastic cocktail menu and you have all those kind of identifiers like we are truly a place, then that is where you can start to generate a little bit more income. Your checkout is going to go higher. There's no doubt about it. And the most important thing, though, is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but they probably do, but your bar program should reflect your culinary side, right? So if
hmm
there's a gap between those two, there's a disparity in your program, and that is kind of a bit of an alarm bell, and you won't get the return customers that you would potentially get from my experience. So it's more of like a positioning and who you are as a company versus like a competitive advantage these days. Um, but there's also like layers of craft, cocktails and
Right.
mixology as well.
So thinking about layers and just what popped into my head is that if you did New York City high-end mixology at a place in the South that served burgers, to your point, that's never going to work.
There's a huge disparity. It's on the other
Right.
side, right? The cocktail program way outshines the culinary side, and
Right.
it doesn't match the demographics, and that's the thing you really have to dial in.
Right. So at a place that does burgers, what do you think? You could do something maybe if you wanted to do cool cocktails like a really interesting smoked old fashioned or something that still
100%.
plays that same group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you can do some really fun spins on classics and
Hmm
think about all those things. Like you can make a really cool boozy milkshake. Like burgers and
hmm
milkshakes are a thing, right? So
Yeah.
you can kind of lean in that direction and like really have some fun there. Um, like there's a ton of different directions. Like even like high-end craft slushy machines,
hmm
um, they're built for speed, man. Like if you're a volume place and you don't have a slushy machine, you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table.
So in that way, I mean, it mixology really works for everybody. And I think
Mhm.
though one of the things that stops folks from going down that road of mixology and for a lot of bar owners in a lot of cases, I think it's a lack of knowledge is part of it. But the
Yep.
other part of it is a fear of what that does to your costs, what that looks like, when it comes down the P&L. And you'll hear a lot of people say, well, I'd love to do something nicer, but I can't get $15 for a cocktail. So how do you square the circle of I want to do maybe something nicer, but I'm not convinced that it's actually going to be beneficial for my business and on the data end of things, on the P&L side of things, I'm not going to see a positive result.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I think it's not for everybody. I'll
Mm,
really on that. Like we've kind of identified a couple different scenarios here. But if you are an owner and operator and you know that you want to kind of go this direction, or at least you want to test it out, there's a couple different ways you can do it. First and foremost, run specials. Do
mm,
highlight cocktails, run it for a couple of weeks, see if there's an uptick on sales in that specific special. And if it is, then you might say, okay, cool. That was successful. Let's add one element onto our cocktail menu, run another special, right? And so you're slowly getting your customers kind of used to the idea of spending more for a quality drink. Um, Obviously, you don't have to commit to this. If the data comes back and you're like, that was awful, I'm never going to do that again. Cool. Or you test something different, or you do a different spin on it, or you go a little bit different angle in that. I mean, it's not for everybody, so I would highly recommend, if you're a little nervous on it and you're not sure how your clientele is going to respond to it, that's one way of doing it for sure.
all right. And I know that when it comes to data, because we're kind of getting into that conversation there, you are just as much of a data nerd as I am about measure everything, understand everything, and really use that data to drive your business forward and to make smart decisions.
Right.
So when it comes to bartending behind the bar, a mixology program, what are kind of the key data points that you like to look at and track to say this is a good idea, this is working, or it's not quite working?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is obviously top line revenue. That's beautiful one indicator no matter who you are. If you're a business owner, that's where you want to look. And on the other side of that is what's the profitability of this look like? So my cost of goods, what's my wastage look like? There's a lot of different data points you can select. The things that I always look at is what are my top movers? What are my top 10 cocktails? What are my top 10 pours? What am I doing out of my spirit side? And figuring out what that looks like and get a really good customer profile on spirits. And if there's any way of incorporating my most called for spirits into a cocktail menu so I can leverage my sales reps to get me better pricing, that's one way I do it, right? If Grey Goose, Citron, or orange or whatever flavor happens to be popular at the moment, if I see that uptick, I can incorporate that into a cocktail. Or one of the things I did was Kettle was one of my most called for spirits. I incorporated that into a cocktail. I got better pricing, and I actually tried to get it in my well to get even better pricing. And so then you can do bulk buys, you can do a bunch of different stuff, combos, all that stuff. And combos are a great way of just maximizing your profitability behind the bar. I don't know if Headers is still doing it, but I know they were notorious for that. If you buy 2 bottles of Hendrix, you got a bottle of something for free. I think it was like Stoli for the longest time. And so I milk that. I absolutely milk that because I got a $30 bottle of spirit basically for free. I would run my cocktail menu off of those and really start to generate my revenue based on that. So like if you're not talking to your reps and finding out what the best deals are, the best combos are, you're leaving a lot of revenue or a lot of profitability behind. So having a great relationship with your reps is another great way. So collect that data up front, see where your top sellers are, see if there's a way you can kind of leverage that into your beverage program. Talk to your rep, see if there's a way of negotiating better pricing, bulk buys, and then combos. That's the best thing for profitability there. The other thing is volume. If you're top 10 cocktails that you have to hand make every single time, they take a ton of time. Figure out ways of just compartmentalizing that build out process. Even if you want to move to a slushing machine, or if you want to go draft cocktails, imagine if you're doing 50 old fashions a night and it's taking you 3 minutes a cocktail. What happens if you can streamline that so a old fashioned takes 15 seconds? So your bartender is going to sell the hell out of it. Your front end staff is going to sell the hell out of it because they know the construction time is fast, right? But it's just a spiral effect at that point. It's a flywheel effect. So the faster you can make these cocktails, you're just going to sell more of them.
Absolutely. And something you touched on in the middle there that I think is worth highlighting is using free goods. Because I feel like a lot of bar owners, right? And this also will tie back in the mixology piece as well, because a lot of bar owners, they get these free goods. And we all pretty much know the free goods are things that the suppliers have to get distributed that they can't sell a lot of the time, which means a lot of them are kind of random, right? You're getting this weird lemon liqueur, or you're getting some vodka that has 15 different flavors in it. But if you just set that on the shelf and go, I don't know what the hell to do with it, you're missing a huge opportunity because pouring that bottle is 0% cost.
It's huge. Yeah.
And
it's incredible. So, yeah, like the first thing I always recommend for any new bar manager is, first of all, don't change anything. Like, just let information come in and like gather your information. But actively start working through your back bar, like the stuff in your back room that has been sitting there since they opened the restaurant. Like, start working through that inventory because that's locked up cash that's just sitting in the business, and just getting as much product out of that back room into specials, generate income on it, and don't replace it. Just get it out of your storage room. But yeah, like any of those promos, man, that is literally like liquid gold.
It is. And if, I mean, it obviously varies a little bit state to state, but in most states, if you do any real volume, you can get a lot of them.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, I obviously there's, if you tie the mixology into it and you understand flavor profiles, the weird vodka with 16 flavors that don't make sense or the 5 vodkas you got that are sugar cookie and vanilla and sugar and all taste identical, you can at least come up with something for them that's going to be interesting to your guests. And even if you're selling a shot for $4, well, if you have 10 cents in it, who really cares?
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
it's a huge opportunity that a lot of people miss. The other thing that I wanted to go back to that you had touched on earlier was looking at your P mix to drive where your menu goes. Because I feel like so often, whether it's a bar owner or a bar manager or a bartender that's writing cocktails, we all like to write what we like to drink. Right? And we don't necessarily always go to our P mix and say, okay, what are we selling? What brands do our guests like? What type of weird liquor do our guests like? Because maybe you have a bunch of people that drink brandy. I don't know. It's plausible,
Yeah.
right? It's not highly likely, but maybe you're that weird bar. And so what is there anything in particular you look at in a P mix to say, okay, cool, maybe I should go this direction or maybe I should go that direction?
Well, and I think that's a really good question. I think it's all about frequency as well. Like how often are you pulling your PMX? Is it once every 6 months? I mean, I pull my PMX probably once a week. And so I really kind of scan through that and look for things that are moving. And like once you start to incorporate all of this data together, you can do really interesting things with your product mix, with your inventory, with your cash flow. Like it really is incredible once you start understanding how a business is structured and how revenue flows through your business. So the way I would use my PMix is not in two words. I would look at it as like, okay, what am I selling and how much am I selling, right? And this is why I did mine weekly. I need to know what I'm going to be ordering. So I already knew how many pours I'm getting out of a bottle. I did all that information. I've trained my front end bartenders. This is what it means. I want a standard 1.5 ounce pour because if you don't, then I don't have good data on the other side to replenish the product. So I made that very clear to them. So I could use it as a way of replenishing my bars, streamlining my inventory considerably, and also predicting what's going to happen over the next month, right? So the way I would use my PMix is I would look at what I sold last week, what I sold over the last 30 days, and what I sold the same time period last year for as many years back as I could go, right? Then I can get trending data based off of my PMix and my what I actually sold. And so the way I would use it, I would use that against revenue and covers and seats of, okay, so over this last year, this last cycle, I'm up 10% from the year before, and I'm up 15% overall. So I'd say, okay, cool. If I'm trending over 10%, and you look at last year's data, I'm going to adjust it up 10% to adjust my par levels so that I'm not holding a ton of inventory. I need to adjust my inventory up by 10% on my high-end movers. So that's how I would use my product mix as well. And then I would buy in cycles. So I'm lazy. I'm absolutely lazy. I like to be as efficient as possible. That's a better way of saying it. So what I would do is at the beginning of my inventory cycle, I would buy everything. I would buy as much as I possibly could, right? I would buy everything I knew I would need for 30 days, if I could do it. And then still leaving room to do the random orders every week if I needed to fulfill those. But at the end of that month, I wanted nothing in my back room at all. I wanted to be able to count my black bar, and that's it. And for the most part, I was pretty successful at it. So I got my standing inventory down to, I don't even know, probably $25,000, maybe $30,000 every inventory cycle. And that's because I was able to use the data to tell me what my customers are actually ordering and not over purchase and tie up a bunch of cash in the business. And if you can just get that cash flow ball rolling, it really will transform businesses.
Absolutely. And another thing, or one of the things that you touched on there is looking at trends. And so I remember the day that Dr. McGillicuddy's cinnamon whiskey was suddenly Fireball, right? And I went from selling cases of Jaeger a week to cases of Fireball a week. And I will admit I wasn't watching my stuff close enough, and I just got punched in the face by it
Yeah.
because there was a little tiny trend movement, and then it was just off.
Right.
And if you missed that, you weren't aligned to the market, and the people that were paying attention and caught it were far better off than I was.
Yeah.
And that may be, I mean, at least in my memory, that is the biggest individual shift that hit kind of the neighborhood bar market.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, it's why you have to pay attention to your PMix. It's why you have to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you end up with, like you said, a bunch of stuff on the shelves that is just a waste of space and a waste of money at that point.
Right. Yeah.
And so when we think about profitability, right? Because that's the reason you don't want money on the shelves is because you need cash to make a bar work, right? Cash flow is highly important, and that's what last week's episode was actually on, was cash flow. So this fits in very nicely. But with that cash flow, is there any single thing you can do when it comes to your liquor program outside of inventory and kind of the things we've discussed, but any other single thing that really promotes cash flow in your bar? And I know that's
I
a hard
think,
one.
yeah, I mean, obviously, if you do happy hours, that's a good thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's all different ways of adding revenue to your bar. There's a couple of people I've seen that have done it really well, like guest bartending sessions. Like if you have a slow day, reach out to the local businesses, see if there's people that want to do a guest bartending shift, train them for an hour or two. They're going to bring a ton of people in from their business. You're going to get
Mm-hmm.
those people as regulars now, hopefully. And so that's a really good way of just generating income on like slow days. And establishing yourself in the community. And I think it's a really good strategy. And when I saw it, I was like, that's genius. Because
Yeah,
everybody wants to be a bartender,
they do.
especially in corporate America. They either want to own a bar or be a bartender. So it's a cool thing to do. Um, and so that's one way of doing it. Running specials. There was another one that I saw, which was pretty interesting, where they would actually gamify a lot of things behind the bar. Like,
Okay.
people like to gamble, people like to go outside, people like to be silly and do that kind of thing. So, this one bar that I consulted really embraced that. And they did it in a very clever way, where they had like a Wheel of Fortune board, right? Big smear board. And to do the Wheel of Fortune, you had to spend $5.
Okay.
So you gave the bartender $5 and you got to spin the wheel. And on the wheel were a lot of either cocktails or shots that they got for free for promo goods. So you're generating income on free stuff
Mm-hmm.
or even swag. Like the amount of swag that you get as a bar owner is just incredible, right? So
Right.
these are all, and then you had like one good prize, but the one good prize would be, more than compensated by all the other stuff that you were able to generate, all the other
Mm-hmm.
cash that you were able to generate. But yeah, there's so many creative ways of generating income, and I think that's the thing is like, don't rest on your laurels. Keep testing. Like, put some energy into the business. Test new things. And see what works. So as a business owner, you always got to be testing.
Right. Absolutely. And one of the things when we're talking about data and P&Ls and all that is obviously the best way to maintain your cash flow and your profits is to have consistency in how your cocktails are prepared and know what's
Right.
going on. And in addition to doing the training and consulting, you're also in the bar products business. And I know one of the things that I have heard you say multiple times before that just was hideously troubling to me when I heard it was that you've tested a lot of jiggers because you sell jiggers, but you've tested a lot of your competitors, and some of them are up to 20% off. And so if
Yeah.
you're 20% off, I don't care how good your recipe is. You're never going to hit your costs, right? So you can have the best data in the world, but it means nothing if the way you're doing things, if the products you have to do them don't allow you to have that control.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're talking about just profitability on the bottom line, that's a huge one, right? If every cocktail you pour is 20% over on cost, your numbers are screwed. I mean, that's a huge deficit. So having great calibrated tools, having good proper training is really, really key. And so that's one of the things that we're super fanatical about in our company when we produce tools is we want to make sure that they're right, because I know what it means if our jigger's rough. I know what it means if our stuff breaks on a Friday night, because it's happened to me. So, our form of customer service at a bar above is making sure that those tools and that experience is flawless. If your tool breaks on a Friday night, that's bad customer service. I am designing that tool very, very wrong. So that's something that we always, always think about with every single thing that we create is, will this last in a commercial environment? And if not, then we probably won't launch it. We always test everything. So we have a very, very, very tight tolerance on our jiggers. So if they're over, I think it's like 5%, we reject it. We just won't accept them. But yeah, to your point, if it's a 20% variance, and this is where it gets really interesting, is if all your bartenders have a different year, and say one is 20% over, the other one's 10% under, the consistency with those cocktails, like, there's no way. Like, this person's cocktail versus that person's cocktail in the same bar are very different. So I think there's a whole other side of the consistency when we talk about, different kind of tools working in the same environment. So I'm a big proponent of one set of tools across all your bartenders, standard training, and making sure everything's right. And I think there's one other thing I'd like to kind of highlight here, and it's something that I think everybody at the first thing of this podcast can immediately implement and take away and put spotlight on. And that is, if you go to your bar right now and ask every single one of your bartenders what the standard pour is for beer, for wine, and for your spirits, or for your standard cocktails, I guarantee you everything's going to be different. There's not been a single bar I've walked into where everybody knew what a standard pour was, what the correct standard pour was. And so if you could just do that today, that sets a whole different trend up as well. It's like, okay, now I'm watching you. This is any communication training, right? Like, our standard pour is this. And now we're going to test on that. We're going to drill it into you so that way everybody knows. So yeah, I'm a big fan of training. I'm a big fan of consistency, and fanatical about tools and everything else too.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important because so often we ignore the tool side of it, right?
Right.
We go on Amazon, we buy cheap tools. We go online, we buy cheap tools, and it's just kind of, oh, this is what we have. And it for most people, they just go, well, why would I buy a $3 jigger if I can buy a 50-cent jigger? Right? God forbid, why would I buy a $10 or $12 jigger? It just doesn't make sense. But in reality, that extra money is actually saving you money and helping your business in the long run due to your consistency. And another thing too about your jiggers that I found really interesting is that you have more measurement lines. Because you want to talk about consistency. If you don't have the right measurement lines and you're eyeballing it, there's no way that cocktail is the same bartender to bartender.
Right, exactly. And so that's one of the things that I always was frustrated on, is I would guess. Like, every cocktail recipe isn't the same, and especially when you get into high-end mixology, like, your ratios are very different because you're splitting bases out. So, you may never use a 1 1/4 ounce measurement in your entire life as a bartender, but once you get into high-end mixology, those numbers can change very easily. So we did every 1/4 ounce measurement, starting at a 1/4 ounce all the way up to 2 ounces. It also included a bar spoon measurement, a universal standard bar spoon measurement. And our bar spoon is the same as our bar spoon measurement in our jigger, which is the universal standard. So tying all these things together, really creating an ecosystem for our tools to work, is really one of the other angles that we have that many other bar tool companies don't, as we focus on those elements that just get overlooked. And one of the things I always tell people is, like, our barware may look like everybody else's barware, but I guarantee you there is a secret about our bar tools that you probably don't know that makes them better. And it just doesn't you can't see it on a listing online. So there's always something in it.
Well, and two other things about the tools that I've heard you talk about that I want to touch on real quick. The first one is that you actually weld things all the way around rather than spot welding them for the tools that you sell, so that your stuff just doesn't break, right? And that's, I was listening to another podcast you were on where one of the guys that was hosting it shared a story of actually using a shaker that broke and hit a guest, which is never a good thing. And so talk a little bit about the difference between, like, your welds versus other people's welds, which sounds like a crazy thing to discuss, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point we were talking about is when you see most cocktail shakers at the bottom where the weights are, the kind of bulge that sits at the bottom of it. If you see three dots on the bottom, those are the three tackle that are holding the weight onto the shaker. And usually that's where the cocktail shaker will fail. And so with modern mixology and a lot of bartending, now there's a kind of a trend where people will bang their tins together to seal them. It creates a loud noise, eyes come on them, like it's part of the environment, and all that stuff. But when you do that, you're putting a tremendous amount of stress on those welds, and eventually they're going to pop off. And this particular person that I was talking to, his popped off when he was shaking it, and it hit a guest. I haven't had that happen to me, but I've had my welds pop, and just it ruins the cocktail shaker. You throw them away because it's unpolished metal, and it's unusable at that point.
Right.
So what we do on ours is our weights are welded all the way around. Liquid's not getting in there, so nothing's going to rust. Nothing's going to happen. Like if you buy our shakers that are weighted weights on both sides of the small shaker and the big shaker, you can literally hand them down to your kids. They will never break. When we launched our first round of cocktail shakers, we had a weighted, unweighted. So the small tin was unweighted, and there's a lot of reasons we did that. It creates a tighter seal for egg white cocktails, so they don't break on you. But I handed a set to my friend, a high volume place in Miami or in Florida, and he sent it back to me about a year ago. And he said that one shaker made 100,000 cocktails, and because it was unweighted, it didn't have that extra metal on it, and that's when finally it failed. If he had the weighted, he'd still be using it. And he told me that he bought 7 more sets when I sent him mine, and he's still using the 7 other sets of the unweighted ones. So like we take durability very seriously. Like I said, it's our form of customer service. If it breaks on a Friday, we've done a terrible job.
Yeah. Well, it's I don't know that there's anything, and I'm a full disclosure, like the worst bartender ever, but sometimes I'd have somebody call out and have to do it. And there is nothing more frustrating than the tools not working the way you need them when you're busy.
Right.
I mean, and
absolutely.
once you get, especially if you're a crappy bartender like me, once you get a little bit frazzled and a little bit weeded, it just makes it so easy to spin out of control.
Yeah.
And so eliminating a failure point is huge, just kind of in general, but especially if you're a bad bartender, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm sure a lot of people are interested in what you have going on and are gonna want ways to learn more about your products, find your courses, maybe get in contact with you. So what are the best avenues for the people listening today to be able to get in touch and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so our main site is going to be at barabove.com. That's where we host all of our tools. We have a ton of education there, everything from bartender fundamentals, where all your bartenders can have the same language as far as, how to set all the fundamentals of tending bar, not cocktail recipes, guest interactions, how to build regulars, how to make more money during a shift. So they'll have that standard language there. And the mixology certification and many other courses are at abarabove.com, as well as all of our tools. If you're active on social media, if you look for A Bar Above, you're going to find us. We're on pretty much every platform there is, and as well as YouTube. So we do some fun cocktail videos there where we take a standard cocktail and we kind of go to an extreme on what you can possibly do with that format. So that's a little bit more education and entertainment. But yeah, if you look for A Bar Above, you're going to find us. We've been around for a very long time, and we kind of cornered the market on that name, which was very, very helpful.
Well, yeah, and it's one thing that's very true is you have had a longer online presence than almost anybody in the bar space, right? I mean, you guys were getting out there at kind of the infancy of all this, and so to
Right.
your point, you're not terribly hard to find.
No, we're kind of everywhere. And it took a while to get there, but we're everywhere now, so it's great.
And we'll make sure that for everybody listening in the show notes, we'll have the link to the website and all the social media for you there as well. So if you're listening to the podcast, just go click at the show notes and it's easy to get to all of that. With that, though, is there anything that we have not touched on today or anything that we have not discussed that you think it's really important for bar owners and managers to know?
Yeah, I think there's one big thing, and this is something I always harp on and always get extremely frustrated with. If you are a bar owner or a bar manager, then I think there is almost a responsibility that you have to train your management staff. I think that's one of the biggest gaps we have in our industry. And I think it's after consulting, you know, about 100 different places that I've walked into, I think it's the biggest point of frustration that many bar managers have. They don't have the education, they don't have the knowledge, they don't know the structure of the business, how money moves through the business, and how they can actually affect change from a profitability perspective. And I understand where owners are, that they don't want to give that information away because they're creating their own competition and stuff like that. But my kind of retort to that is like, well, then things aren't going to change, right?
Right.
You could mentor people, and you can create a really solid network of people that respect you and really hold you to a high standard because you've taken the time to nurture them and train them on how to make more money in your business. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that needs to change in our industry is that gap from bartender to management. They have a very hard job and they're not getting paid nearly enough. And that's a byproduct of the industry, right? That's not going to change anytime soon. But if we can provide people with the knowledge to really affect change, make more money in a business, maybe that will help to drive more revenue for them as well. And it's the number one comment I've gotten from every bar manager I've ever talked to is, I don't know how to succeed in my job. And that's incredibly frustrating. And that will burn people out, and you're going to choose your managers so fast. So give them the tools to succeed, train them, show them what it means to look at a P&L. How do I affect my P&L? What are my KPIs? What are my goals? What's the bonus structure? I'm going to hit my numbers. How do I hit my numbers? Like, I think that is really, really critical. And I think that's something that I'm super passionate about is management training and giving them the tools they need. And it's just good business. It really, truly is. Every other industry in the world does it. The restaurant stuff. And I don't understand why.
Well, in my mind, some of that comes from a fear on the owners that if they share their P&L, managers will leave, to your point, or that, they people think they're doing better than they are, so they're embarrassed to share that. But at the end of the day, a number that you pay attention to is a number you can manage, and a number you manage is a number you can improve. Right? And if no one tells these managers what's going on and how to read a P&L or anything like that, I don't know how they're ever supposed to make a bar better.
It's the biggest thing. And if you don't do it, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be doing the same thing you're doing now as 20 years from now, right? You're never going to be able to escape your business. And it's almost like you're killing me with throat, right? It's like you're tying yourself to your bills forever. So yeah, that's my biggest gripe, and I will always tell people this. So that is the one thing though I would highly recommend, kind of changing that mindset from an owner perspective. It's worth your time to do this. It's worth your money. It's worth everything that you're going to put into it. It's going to be so much more satisfying.
And to your point just now, better managers mean that you have to work less as an owner. It gives you a life. And that should be obvious, right? If you own a bar, that should be your one goal in life, is to have more of a life. Because if it's not, you will work 90 hours a week.
Right. When was the last time most people took a vacation that own bars? This is probably the reason why.
I took a vacation before I bought a bar and after I sold a bar. Right? Like,
it's insane. It's insane.
7 years I didn't really do it.
Yeah, right. So it's something I'm very passionate about, and I have very strong feelings about, if you can tell. And I think one other thing I want to kind of highlight here, and thank you for asking that question. I did a podcast for 8 years. I know what it looks like. I know the amount of work that goes into doing the production, scheduling, and all the things that happen before you actually launch a podcast, and how much effort that goes into. So if you're listening to this podcast, leave a review. Like, it takes very little time out of your day, and it means so much. The algorithms will pick it up, you'll get more distribution, and it costs you nothing. So if you're enjoying this, Chris is doing a phenomenal job. I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts, and you're delivering gold for bar owners. So just take the 10 seconds out, leave a great review, and from a producer that has done it before, it means the world. It really does. So that's the last thing. That's my last word. Soapbox.
Thank you for saying that. Because it's one of the hard things about being a podcast host, and I'm sure you ran into this as well. It becomes very easy to talk up other people.
You're right.
Well, it's still simultaneously very hard to say things about yourself. So thank you very much for saying that, because I don't have the balls to do it myself. I don't know. But you've been there. You get it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it took me years to be able to ask for a review. So I totally get it.
So with that, Chris, just thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights and the information. As I mentioned a moment ago, for anyone that wants to learn more about Chris, learn more about his products, learn more about what courses he has, we'll have all those links in the show notes for you guys to go to. And with that, guys, that'll wrap us up for today. So a couple notes before we leave. If you have not joined Bar Business Nation on Facebook, go ahead, head over there, join that group. We have a growing group of bar owners that is just fantastic. And I post a lot there, but it's also a space for everyone to ask questions, learn from each other. Because I know from being in this business to one of the earliest points Chris made, eventually you learn how much you don't know. And I will tell you right now, there's a whole heck of a lot I don't know. And there's a whole heck of a lot that none of us, well, no individual knows all of it. So we're trying to create a community so that everyone can grow and learn together and really support each other. And as always, everybody, I hope you have a great day, and we will talk again later.